If you are looking for an impressive low-cost DIY that requires no painting skills and only takes about 20 minutes to create, stay tuned. Hi, this is Chris Haughey. Welcome to Create with Chris. Today I wanted to do something really different. I was in the mood to create but not do intensive painting, so I decided it would be fun to create something that was near and dear to my heart but not stressful. I call projects like this my painting vacation. So grab your brushes and let's get started. I'm using a fat mailing tag. This is MDF, but any surface would work. I have a 3/4 inch oval wash. Bigger the brush, the faster the coverage is, the quicker it can be laid down, and the results are going to be much better. Just loaded it with crystal blue. I have a fair amount of moisture on my brush. Want to make sure to cover this background quickly. Once the paint starts to drag, just grab a little more water or a little more water and a little more paint. And you can see I'm using mostly, I paint quickly, but I'm using mostly the flat of the brush, the side, not the chisel edge. And just lay that paint in, almost slip slap or an X kind of application of the paint. I like to see those brush strokes. I don't want it to be spotted, and I can go back over and just kind of, this is just the base coat, so it can be not perfect, and that's fine. I do let this dry. Now I'm going back in and just repeat the same technique. You can see how much quicker this application of paint is because I don't have to be super fussy. I'm just laying it in. I probably have as much water on my brush as I do paint. Again, it's not solid or heavy. It may look like it on camera, but it has so much moisture in it. As it dries, you can see those brush strokes. Keep that very moist. If you live in an area where it's dry and the paint dries quickly, use a mister to keep that paint moist. Picked up a little bit of thicket. This is a darker color. Just wanted to bring some drama into that sky background area. A lot of moisture. It's too much paint. Just stick the brush in water and remove some of that paint. I have a paper towel there just for that reason. Now I'm going in with a little bit of white. In my mind, I want it to look like clouds in the sky. I like that. Just those brush strokes, it's just very painterly, so easy to attain. And now I'm just using the brush to more or less kind of soften or smooth out in between colors. I don't want any sharp edges. And I definitely want it to look like clouds in the sky. And you know, clouds can be just about anything. So just that brightness in the area. Now I'm just going back pretty much with a clean, wet brush to soften those areas. My paint is still fluid and wet. Just kind of playing around a little bit with that. Remember, the church is going to cover quite a bit, so it's just not that fussy. This is my church shape. Again, if you don't have this piece, it can be cut out of a heavy cardstock or a piece of cardboard. I'm using modeling paste. I thought that would be fun texture-wise. My palette knife. If you don't have modeling paste, you can use a little bit of spackling or drywall compound. I just get a hint of it on the bottom of my palette knife. It doesn't take much. I'm just kind of dragging it across to get a little bit of texture on that. I wanted this to be very rustic and earthy, and I thought that would give a better result. This definitely, you don't even have to use the texture paste. It's just another element of distressing that gives that look of a weathered wood. I do want that to thoroughly dry, so while that is drying, I'm going to go back to my surface. And this is raw umber on my palette knife. I just have a very light skim of paint on the back of my palette knife. If the paint is too thick on the bottom of the palette knife, it will create a dark solid blob. And I do that, so I'll show you how to fix it. But this leaves a wonderful antique, weathered kind of effect, and I love the results of this. So easy to attain. Take your time, make sure that it is not overloaded, and the results are going to be spectacular. There I put too much paint on my palette knife, and I have a dark solid glob, and I thought, especially with the wording there, that was going to interfere and be a little bit distracting. I'm taking that damp paper towel that I had before, just lightly kind of, I call it wet sanding, just to remove that excess paint. And remember, this is not dry, it's just been on there for a few seconds, so I can go back and just redo that spot, minimize that blackness. Now that the modeling paste has dried on my church, I'm painting that with raw umber. I do dilute my paint quite a bit so that it flows on easily and smoothly, mostly starting toward the middle and brushing it toward the outer edges. I do want to get a pretty good coverage on this. Doesn't have to be perfect, but with that texture on there, if the paint is fluid with water, it's so much easier to cover that. Picked up a little bit of bleach sand on my oval wash. I don't have my brush loaded heavily, and I have a very light touch, so it creates almost a barnwood effect. Let that dry and repeat that with the Snow White. I wanted my little church to be white, starting at the top and pulling all the way down. That paint is fluid, but you can see what a light touch. It allows that texture to be very prominent and very visible, starting at the bottom and pulling toward the top. That eliminates any start and stop lines in the middle. And I just kind of play around with that until I get a fairly uneven look to that. I want it to be bright, but look at that beautiful texture. It's absolutely wonderful. Just loaded some of that raw umber on my round, and I start in the center, and then I'm just going to paint a door on that. The paint is very fluid. It just helps it to flow on easier. And I'm just going to brush it down. Not worried about it being solid or heavy. Just want to give a nice coverage on that. And just brush it out. You can still see a little bit of that white showing through, and I kind of like that look. It helps it look like it's a little bit weathered as well. I did go outside and found some sticks. I found this little branch that fit perfectly on the V of the church roof, and I'm just using hot glue and putting a little bead down. I have such a terrible time with hot glue. I always end up getting hurt, so I have to be extra careful. However, with a branch like this, or with uneven objects, a hot glue seems to work a little bit better, and I'm not putting it on a doorway or in heat, so the glue should hold it really well. I just took a pair of my clippers and pliers and just cut that, almost mitered it like a little angle, and then I can add glue to that and position it. Always get burnt, but make sure that it's sort of in the right place. And I thought it might be easier maybe to put the glue on the surface instead of on my fingers. And I got a little excess glue there, and I'll just take my stylus and kind of pull that extra glue out. I wanted to dry brush the cross. I'm just taking that same round with a little bit of white and highlighting that cross. Now I wanted to make sure when I put my words on that my church isn't in the way. Great is the biggest word, so I position that first, make sure that church is in the right spot. Loaded my spectacular stencil brush with raw umber, and I'm just stenciling that on. Now if you want to make sure that your lettering is perfect and you are using a stencil, load the brush well, wipe the brush over a paper towel to remove the excess paint. 9 times out of 10, Again, I'm positioning the church to make sure I get the words in the correct placement. 9 times out of 10, when there's an issue with stenciling, the brush is overloaded. Always, 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 after it's loaded, just wipe it on a paper towel, have a light pressure, either use a circular motion or a pouncing motion. When the paint starts to run out on the brush, go ahead and reload it. Don't try to really pound it or get more out of it. And I use a T-square to make sure my letters are in a straight line. You can also just trace the lettering on and paint it using a brush or a marker. What's nice about this project, because it is primitive, it doesn't have to be perfect. I do like it to look like it's hand painted, so I'm going back with my little round and some raw umber just to fill in those bridges. That makes it look like it's a continuous script. I found out that little round was a little bit too thick and I had trouble, so I went back to my Epic script liner and it was much easier. Just thin the paint and then just fill that in. Let me know if you like this type of project. Every now and then I like to do something that's just a little bit different. And I get this idea. It's hard for me to tone down and not do all the shading and highlighting. However, I love how this turned out. So let me know what you think. After I put that little branch on for the roof line, it didn't fit tightly against that straight edge, so I was going to use my fingers, and then I just went and loaded my round with some of that raw umber just to fill in. And it also covers up that hot glue and makes it look like the roof is solid without the white peeking through. It's just a little detail, but I think it does make a difference. And you can see there how much white is showing and what a difference adding that, just that little hint of raw umber makes. If you do decide to paint something like this, be sure to post it. I'd love to see pictures. Just pop it in the comments below. I decided to bump it up from the bottom just a little bit, squirting a little bit of hot glue on there. If you're going to hang it on a wreath in a doorway, be sure to add some tacky glue in there to make it permanent. Once I get that positioned, I left that little bit at the bottom. I have some reindeer moss. I just picked this up at the dollar store. Put a little bit at the base of the church. I debated about putting windows on the church. I thought that might be kind of cute too, but I wanted to keep this very simple. Took a little bit of that raw umber and I'm using my 1/2 inch angle. Just put a little bit of paint on the toe of the brush, kind of keep that color toward the outer edge, and just floated a little bit of that around. Just gives a little more dimension and adds to that rustic appeal. I love how this is turning out. I think it's so pretty. I found a tiny little button in my button box. I have buttons from my mom, my grandma, and my great-grandma. Had these little flower buttons in. I debated, I had some silk flowers and I just tinted them with some raw umber and I thought that would be cute. But these little buttons were so sweet, I thought I would stick them on. And I kind of played around with placement. Ended up hot gluing them, and I just put a little cluster of 3 in the corner. Just wanted to keep this very simple and keep the focus on how great thou art. I found a pine cone. We have a pine tree that has tiny little pine cones. I thought that kind of looked like a bell. Stuck that up in the bell tower, or you could put a little bow up there with a button in it. I did do a video on the little messy bow, but for some reason the camera did not record. I found some old pieces of lace and burlap and just layered those on, tied it with a piece of wire, stuck it through the hole, and then put a little button in the center of the bow. I thought the letters looked like they needed just a little something, so I'm using my white Uniball gel pen just to do a little bit of a highlight on some of the wider sections of some of the letters. It doesn't detract from the strength of the letters at all, but it does brighten them up, and since that's kind of the main focal, I think just that little bit makes such a big difference. and it's just basically a little line and a couple dots. For me, this project was so inspirational and uplifting. I want to thank you for joining me today, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I encourage you to take time to create something beautiful that can truly refresh your spirit and renew your creativity. Everything I used is listed in the links below, so be sure to check that out. Don't forget to hit the bell, like, and subscribe. Be sure to share it with your friends. Leave me a comment. I'd love to hear from you. So until next time, keep creating, keep smiling, and I will see you on our next painting adventure together.